This is a story that will shake you to your core. A story that reminds us how thin the veil is between the life we believe we have and the one we've been forced to forget. It's a tale of a man who stumbled upon the most haunting truth imaginable. He was the ghost he had been searching for. This is Forgotten Ties, and what you're about to hear is a journey into a memory that was never meant to be found. Our story begins in the heart of a small, nondescript town, where the days are long and the nights are quiet. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and secrets are hard to keep. But some are buried so deep they become a part of the very earth. Ethan was a man of routines. He woke up at 6 a.m., drank his coffee black, and walked the same 3 blocks to the small diner where he worked as a short-order cook. His life was simple, predictable, even a little mundane. He was a man without a past, or so he thought. He had no memories of his childhood, no recollections of his family. All he had was a name given to him by the state after a traumatic accident 15 years ago that left him with a severe case of retrograde amnesia. He was told he had been found wandering on the side of a highway, disoriented and alone, with no identification. The doctors did their best, but the memories never returned. He had accepted it, built a new life, a new identity. He was Ethan, and that was enough. But a ghost of a memory, a fleeting image of a girl with fiery red hair and eyes the color of emeralds, would sometimes haunt his dreams. It was a beautiful yet agonizing wisp of a thought that felt both like a stranger and an old friend. He never spoke of it, chalking it up to his brain, trying to create a past it couldn't remember. One brisk afternoon, the diner was unusually slow. Ethan wiped down the counter, his mind wandering. A local woman, a kind, elderly lady named Martha, walked in, her arms laden with groceries. She was a regular, and they often exchanged pleasantries. Today, however, she seemed different. Her face was etched with a sadness that went beyond the usual weariness of age. As she set her bags on the counter, a crumpled flyer fell out. Ethan, without thinking, reached down to pick it up. It was a missing person poster. The picture was faded, but the details were clear. A young man, maybe in his early 20s, with a striking resemblance to a younger version of himself. He had the same jawline, the same shape of the nose, even a similar, slightly off-center smile. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. A chill ran down his spine. It was unsettling, but he dismissed it as a coincidence. After all, the world was full of doppelgangers. But then, his eyes fell upon the 2 most critical details. First, the missing man's name, Samuel Sam Harris. Second, the date he went missing 15 years ago. The same year Ethan was found on that lonely stretch of highway. He stared at the poster, his hands trembling. The picture, the eyes. The eyes of the man on the poster were a mirror image of his own. They held the same haunted, questioning gaze that he saw in the mirror every morning. A chilling familiarity washed over him, not of a stranger, but of a reflection he had seen countless times. Martha looked at him, her gentle eyes filled with concern. "Oh dear, are you all right, Ethan? You've gone pale." He could only stare at the poster, his world spinning. He was looking at a ghost. The ghost of a person who had vanished without a trace. And that ghost had his eyes. The woman with the red hair from his dreams suddenly flashed in his mind, clearer than ever before. He felt a profound sense of wrongness, a gnawing suspicion that the life he had so carefully built was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a message from a past that refused to stay buried. A past that was now screaming to be remembered. And the man in the poster was just the beginning of a nightmare he was about to wake up to. The poster was a key, but a key to a lock he didn't even know existed. Ethan's mind raced, replaying every detail he had just seen. Samuel Harris, missing for 15 years. And the eyes, the identical, unmistakable eyes. He felt a suffocating weight in his chest, a mix of terror and a strange, desperate hope. The woman with the red hair. She was a part of this, he was sure of it now. That fleeting dream wasn't a random figment of his imagination. It was a fragment of a life that belonged to Samuel Harris. He thanked Martha, his voice barely a whisper, and told her he needed to step out for a moment. He walked the streets of his town, The same streets he'd walked 1,000 times, but now they felt alien, sinister. Every face he passed, every car that drove by, felt like a potential conspirator in a plot he didn't understand. Who was he, really? Was he Ethan, the short-order cook with no past? Or was he Samuel, a man who had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a family who still held on to hope? His first stop was the local library. He needed information, a tangible connection to the name Samuel Harris. He found old newspaper archives, their pages yellowed with time. He scrolled through the digital files, his heart pounding in his ears. And then he found it. A headline from 15 years ago. Local man vanishes. Police baffled. The article was a small 2-paragraph piece. It detailed the disappearance of a 22-year-old named Samuel Harris, last seen leaving his home for a late-night drive. He was a promising young artist, engaged to a woman named Clara. Clara. The name felt like a jolt of electricity. It was close to his dream girl, but not quite. Still, it was a lead. The article mentioned he had lived with his parents, who had recently moved to the area. Ethan's search deepened. He found more articles, more posters, a web of sorrow and unanswered questions. He found a picture of Samuel Harris with his parents, their faces etched with grief. He could see the family resemblance, a mirror reflecting a life he was supposed to have had. And then he found a picture of Samuel with Clara. She was smiling, her arms wrapped around him, her hair a cascade of fiery red. Her eyes were a stunning shade of emerald. His dream girl. She was real. The dreams weren't random. They were memories trying to break through the wall of amnesia that had been built around his mind. But why was he found miles away from where Samuel disappeared? Why was his memory wiped clean? Was it the accident? Or was it something more? A sinister puzzle was coming into focus. He knew he couldn't go to the police. He was the prime suspect, a man with no memory, a man who was the spitting image of the missing person. They would lock him up, accuse him of foul play, and his new life would be over before he had a chance to understand his old one. He decided he had to find Clara. She was the key. She would have answers. He found an old address for her family, a small, quaint house on the outskirts of the town where Samuel had lived. He took a bus there, the journey feeling like a passage to another world, a world he had unknowingly been a part of. The house was well kept, with a rose garden in the front yard. He saw an elderly woman watering the roses. She had the same red hair, now streaked with silver. It had to be her. It was Clara. He approached her, his throat tight, his heart a drum against his ribs. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a tremor. Are you Clara?" She turned, her eyes, those same green eyes from his dreams, now filled with a lifetime of sorrow. She looked at him, and her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to something akin to terror. She dropped the watering can, and it clattered on the ground. She took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth. "Sam?" she whispered, the name a ghost of a sound. Is that really you?" He couldn't answer. He could only stand there, a living ghost, watching a woman he had never met before react to him as if he were a resurrected spirit. She rushed forward, her hands on his face, tracing the lines of his jaw, his cheekbones, as if she was trying to prove he was real. "Sam," she sobbed. "Where have you been? We thought you were gone forever." The truth was a punch to the gut. The tears in her eyes, the raw, unfiltered pain, were proof. He wasn't Ethan. He was Samuel. He was a ghost in his own life, a man who had been missing for 15 years. And now he had to figure out how he had lost himself, and who had been so desperate to make sure he was never found again. The truth unfolded over the next few hours, a horrifying, meticulous tapestry of betrayal and deceit. Clara, her voice trembling with emotion, recounted the night of his disappearance. It wasn't an accident. It was a setup. Samuel was a promising artist, on the verge of his first major gallery showing. He had created a series of paintings that were deeply personal, abstract explorations of his childhood. But there was a darkness in them, a hidden narrative. He had never spoken of it, But Clara knew something was wrong. She saw the pain in his eyes when he painted certain canvases, the way he would work for days without rest, as if racing against time. The night he disappeared, he had a secret meeting with a wealthy art collector, a man known for his eccentric and often ruthless business dealings. The collector, a man named Sterling Vance, had expressed an immense interest in Samuel's work, offering him a staggering sum for the entire series. It was an offer too good to refuse, a chance to finally give Clara the life they had dreamed of. But Samuel had been hesitant. He had a gut feeling that something wasn't right, that Vance wasn't just interested in the art. He went to the meeting alone, a decision that would haunt him for the next 15 years. Clara waited up all night, but he never returned. His car was found the next day, abandoned on the side of a rural highway, exactly where Ethan was found, miles from town. The police, with no evidence of foul play, concluded he had simply vanished. It was an unsolved cold case, another tragic mystery in a long list of them. Clara, however, never believed it was a simple disappearance. She had seen the look in Samuel's eyes. She knew something sinister had happened. She had tried to talk to the police, to tell them about Sterling Vance, but they dismissed her as a heartbroken fiancé grasping at straws. Vance was a powerful man, a philanthropist with an unblemished reputation. The police had no motive, no evidence, nothing to connect him to the disappearance. As Clara spoke, fragments of memory began to pierce through Ethan's amnesia. He saw glimpses of the meeting with Vance. A cold, sterile office, the smell of expensive whiskey, the smooth, condescending voice of a man who looked at his art not as a creation, but as a commodity. He saw Vance's eyes, a calculating, dead gray. Vance hadn't been interested in his art. He was interested in what was in his art. Samuel's paintings were a hidden confession. They weren't just abstract art. They were a coded map of his childhood, a journey back to the traumatic event that had shaped his life. He had been a witness to a murder, an event so horrific he had repressed the memory. As a child, he had been found in the woods near his family's remote cabin, a few hundred feet from a shallow grave. He had never spoken a word of what he saw, and his parents, terrified, had moved him far away, hoping to bury the memory forever. But the memory lived inside him, and it came out in his art. The paintings depicted the exact location of the body, a series of symbols and colors that only he could understand. The killer, it turned out, was Sterling Vance. Vance, a young man at the time, had been on a hunting trip and had stumbled upon a rival's hidden stash of illegal goods. In a fit of rage and greed, he had killed the man, a poor, itinerant hunter, and buried the body. He had seen the young boy, Samuel, and had been haunted by the possibility that he would one day remember. Vance had been following Samuel's career, watching from the shadows. When Samuel's art started to get attention, he knew his time was running out. He had to silence him. The meeting was a trap. Vance had planned to drug him, stage a disappearance, and then later kill him. But he had been sloppy. He had left Samuel on the side of the highway, thinking the amnesia was a result of the drugs and the head trauma he'd inflicted. He had never bothered to check if Samuel was dead, confident that he would never be a threat again. The truth hit Ethan like a physical blow. He wasn't a victim of a random accident. He was a survivor of an attempted murder. His amnesia wasn't a tragic coincidence. It was a desperate, self-protective act by his mind to bury a memory that was too horrific to contain. The missing person poster wasn't just a coincidence. It was a lifeline thrown across a vast ocean of time, pulling him back to a life he was meant to forget. And now he had a choice to make. He could retreat, go back to being Ethan, the man with no past, and live a life of fear. Or he could embrace the past, become Samuel again, and seek justice for the life that was stolen from him. The weight of the past was now a physical burden on Ethan's shoulders. Or rather, Samuel's shoulders. The name, the identity, felt like a long-lost limb, painful to reattach but necessary. He couldn't go back to being Ethan, not now. The simple, quiet life he had built was a beautiful lie, a fragile mask that had shattered the moment he saw his own eyes on that poster. He had to be Samuel again, for Clara, for his family, and for the boy who had witnessed a crime and carried the burden of it for a lifetime. But how could he prove it? The amnesia was both a curse and a shield. He had no memory of the crime, no tangible proof to connect Vance to the murder. All he had was Clara's story and a gut feeling that was slowly transforming into a burning certainty. He realized the paintings were the key. They were the only real, physical evidence of what he had witnessed. If he could find them, he could expose Vance. He and Clara spent days poring over old art gallery catalogs and auction records. They learned that Vance had sold off Samuel's collection years ago, shortly after Samuel's supposed disappearance. The paintings were scattered across the country, their ownership records meticulously hidden behind layers of shell companies and private collectors. Vance was a master of his craft, not just as a killer, but as a manipulator. He had erased every trace, every link to what he had done. But he had made one mistake. He had kept one painting, the most haunting and abstract of the series, for himself. It was a dark, brooding piece, filled with jagged lines and splashes of crimson and ochre. Vance had told his inner circle that it was a masterpiece, a reflection of the artist's inner turmoil. But Samuel and Clara knew better. That painting was the final clue, the most direct map to the body. It was a confession in plain sight, a monument to Vance's twisted ego. They knew they couldn't go to the police, not with just a hunch. They needed to get the painting, to get the proof. They devised a daring, almost reckless plan. They would infiltrate Vance's heavily guarded mansion, a fortress of wealth and secrecy. It was a long shot, a suicide mission, but it was their only chance. Clara, a master of disguise and a former theater major, would pose as a potential buyer, an eccentric European art collector with a penchant for rare and dark pieces. Ethan, Samuel, would be her silent, brooding assistant. The night of the heist was a blur of adrenaline and fear. They moved through the mansion, a labyrinth of marble and glass, dodging security cameras and private guards. Clara, with her flawless performance, kept Vance distracted. Her questions about the art, her fake negotiations, a perfect smokescreen. All the while, Samuel was in the shadows, his eyes scanning the walls, searching for the one painting he had to find. He found it in Vance's private study, hanging above a magnificent fireplace. It was more haunting in person, the colors deeper, the lines more defined. He took a picture of it, and then, in a moment of reckless desperation, he took a step closer, his eyes fixed on the canvas. He saw the subtle markings, the hidden symbols. He saw the location of the grave, a detailed map of the forest floor where he had seen the murder. He felt a profound, chilling sense of triumph. He had it. He had the proof. But a voice from behind him shattered the silence. Looking for something? Vance stood in the doorway, a look of amused malice on his face. He hadn't been fooled. He had been toying with them all along. The whole operation was a cat-and-mouse game, and they were the mice. Vance's eyes, cold and dead, looked at Samuel. "I knew it was you," he said, his voice a low growl. "I knew that missing poster would come back to bite me. But you can't prove anything. No one will ever believe you." But as Vance took a step closer, a brilliant idea flashed through Samuel's mind. He wasn't a man with no past anymore. He was a man with a past that was screaming to be heard. He looked Vance dead in the eyes and said, "I remember everything." The lie was just enough. Vance's face, usually a mask of control, faltered for a moment. He lunged for Samuel, his composure cracking. It was all Samuel needed. He threw his own body to the side, and the struggle began. It was a vicious, short fight. Vance, older and more confident, underestimated the desperate rage of a man who had lost 15 years of his life. In the struggle, Vance was thrown against a desk, his head hitting the corner. He fell to the ground, unconscious. Clara rushed in, her face pale with fear. They grabbed the painting and ran, leaving Vance for the police to find. They had their evidence. The court case was a media frenzy. Sterling Vance, the celebrated philanthropist, was charged with murder and attempted murder. The paintings, with their hidden maps, were the star witnesses. Vance, in a desperate attempt to discredit Samuel, claimed he was insane, a man suffering from delusions. But the evidence was too strong. The details of the paintings matched the location of the body perfectly, and the forensics team, with the new information, found more evidence at the burial site. Justice was finally served. Samuel Harris was no longer a missing person. He was a survivor. His identity, his past, was restored. But the path forward wasn't easy. He had to rebuild his life from scratch, this time with a past that weighed heavily on him. He reconnected with his parents. Their tears a balm for 15 years of grief. He and Clara, their love story reignited by the most unusual of circumstances, began to heal together. And that's our story on Forgotten Ties. A tale of a man who found himself, only to discover he was the ghost he'd been looking for. It reminds us that our past, no matter how deeply buried, will always find a way to surface. Sometimes all it takes is a faded photograph and a pair of eyes that look a little too much like your own. If the story shook you, if it made you think about the secrets that lie just beneath the surface, then please take a moment to hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel to make sure you never miss another deep dive into the mysteries that define us. And don't forget to ring that notification bell, because you never know what we might unearth next.